Welcome back to day 20, where the courtroom has officially transformed into a high-stakes episode of Antiques Roadshow, Broken Plastic Edition. Ashley Vallier returned to the stand to lead us through a grueling slideshow of stippling and dimples, proving that even forensic evidence has skin texture issues it would rather not discuss. While Adam Lally spent the morning playing a slow-motion game of Tetris with taillight shards and Scotch tape, the real drama was brewing in the sidebars. Between the defense's 4-hour cross-examination threats regarding the elusive Trooper Proctor and the judge's attempt to schedule a When Will This Ever End tour for late June, we're trading in short days for a full residency in Dedham. Buckle up, because we're moving to 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. shifts, and the only thing more certain than the mechanical fit of these plastic pieces is the jury is going to need a lot more coffee to make it to Juneteenth. Welcome in, everybody. Before we dismantle today's legal theatrics, you know the drill. Hit the buttons that make the internet happy. Like, subscribe, and the notification bell, unless you enjoy being the last to know. And to get behind-the-scenes access to the madness, join the membership squad. We're starting with the FACS, because conjecture is more fun when it's shared. Buckle up. Justice is supposed to be blind, but I'm definitely not. Welcome to the virtual juror, where the law is complicated, but my commentary is not. Snark may be my reality, but evidence is still royalty. We begin today with Commonwealth Witness 52 back on the stand, Ashley Vallier. Ashley Vallier resumes her testimony after a few days off, and shockingly, she doesn't have the exact contents of item 7-16 memorized. Prosecutor Lally, ever the patient tour guide, begins a grueling marathon of showing her photos of plastic shards next to rulers. We get to hear about stippling and dimples, because apparently even evidence has skin texture issues. Ashley thinks there were dots on the plastic, but when asked if they were raised or flushed, she gives the classic, "I don't recall." Riveting. Lally asks Ashley to explain her process for the 11th time. It's a real high-tech operation. She looks at colors. Groundbreaking. She sees if things look like they might fit. She brings them together for a mechanical fit, which is forensic speak for putting the puzzle pieces together to see if they click. She looks at them under a stereo zoom microscope, essentially a fancy magnifying glass on a stick, to confirm that yes, they were once the same piece of junk. We finally get to the star of the show, item 3-1, the passenger side taillight housing. It's a whopping 14 by 9 by 8 inches of piece A. Ashley confirms that she managed to fit piece B and piece F back into the housing. What a success. Then we move on to the less successful dating profiles of the evidence world. Item 7-5, 3 pieces. None of them liked each other. No mechanical fit. Item 7-6, 2 pieces. Total strangers. No match. Item 7-8, 14 pieces. After what I assume was a very long afternoon of playing Tetris, Ashley found that piece C fit piece D, and piece E fit piece F. The rest of the pieces? Well, they're just very, very small and not suitable for comparison, which is a polite way of saying they're literal crumbs. Just as the excitement was reaching a fever pitch, Yannetti asked to approach the bench. Probably to ask if someone had a spare hobby that doesn't involve measuring plastic dimples. If you thought the mechanical fit tutorial was slow, welcome to Sidebar 173, where the defense is begging for mercy. This is the sidebar where everyone tried to politely tell Prosecutor Lally that watching paint dry would be more efficient. Defense attorney Yannetti, clearly reaching his limit for plastic shard-based entertainment, pulls Lally to the side. He basically says, "Look, I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but we aren't going to argue that these pieces fit together. You're going through every single splinter like it's a diamond in a Tiffany's catalog. Maybe streamline?" Translation: please stop, the jury is aging in real time. Judge Cannoni jumps in with the classic judicial backhand. She tells Lally she won't tell him how to try his case either, right before telling him exactly what to do. Her advice? Quit leading the witness. Stop putting answers in Ashley's mouth, even if it's just about dimples. Just ask, what are we looking at? Instead of the long-winded, soul-crushing preambles, just point at the screen and let the witness speak. Lally, ever the compliant student, offers a brief, sure, and Yannetti retreats, likely hoping that the next hour won't involve a deep dive into the molecular structure of piece G. The sidebar concludes, the record is preserved, and we return to our scheduled programming, the never-ending taillight puzzle. Buckle up, because we've finally reached the Lego Master phase of the trial. If you thought the sidebar was a hint for Lally to pick up the pace, he clearly took that as a challenge, to be as painstakingly thorough as possible. It's the plastic puzzle hour. Lally and Mix Vallier spent a quality chunk of time playing how many pieces are in a bag. They cycled through items 7-9 all the way to 7-16. It was a thrilling sequence of item 7-9, 3 pieces, no matches. Item 7-11, 6 pieces, red, black, and colorless, a real rainbow. Item 7-12, 14 pieces, all colorless. But wait, there's a twist. Vallier actually found 3 sets of matches here. After counting individual shards until the room was dizzy, Vallier explained they didn't just look at the bags in isolation. No, they cross-referenced the bags. They were able to assemble 5 larger pieces. Piece 1 is the overachiever of the group, comprised of shards from basically every bag in evidence. 7-5, 7-8, 7-10, 7-11, 7-13, 7-15, and 7-16. Pieces 2 through 5 followed, proving that if you have enough time and a high degree in forensics, you too can make a larger piece of plastic out of several smaller ones. Lally then decided the jury needed to see the family photos. We were treated to a parade of exhibits, 384 through 402, featuring piece 1 from the front, piece 1 from a different angle, piece 1 zoomed in so you can see the tiny white stickers Vallier used to label their work. Pieces 2, 3, 4, and 5 also got their headshots, just in case anyone forgot what apparent plastic looks like. Finally, we got to the point. The questioned items, the stuff found on the lawn, versus the known item, the actual taillight housing, item 3-1. Vallier showed the jury a mechanical fit, which is forensic speak for it fits like a puzzle piece, between piece 1 and the taillight. Vallier's expert opinion is that all these shards were once part of the same unit. Lally ended his direct examination on that high note, leaving the defense to approach the bench, presumably to ask if they can finally have a snack, or a nap, before cross-examination begins. Just when you thought we were done with the plastic shard and paper bag variety hour, we get Sidebar 174, a masterclass in wait, did we actually enter that as evidence? This was the briefest, most polite scramble of the afternoon. Yannetti, apparently feeling the holiday spirit, or just wanting to go home for the next decade, approaches the bench to tell Judge Cannoni he wants things to go smoothly. He's got 11 photos ready for cross-examination. 9 are already in evidence, but 2 are missing from the official record. Specifically, the photos of the front of the evidence bags. You know, the bags that hold the shards that Lally spent 3 hours counting. Lally chimes in, but apparently he's speaking at a frequency only dogs can hear. The judge has to tell him, "I can't hear you," forcing him to repeat that he has no objection. In fact, Lally admits he intended to put the bag photos into evidence himself. He just didn't. Judge Cannoni is clearly over the administrative chaos. She points out the obvious. The photos aren't in evidence, and nobody can currently say where they are in the giant pile of exhibits. Yannetti, ever prepared, offers his own copies, complete with his personal internal numbering system. He just asks the court reporter to slap an official sticker over his scribbles, so no one is the wiser. Judge Cannoni is desperate to liberate Mix Vallier from the witness stand, mentioning a promise she made to another judge. Yannetti promises he'll be quick, no more than 30 minutes. Everyone agrees to play pretend with the stickers. The evidence bags are officially official, and the stage is set for a speedy cross-examination. We'll see if those 30 minutes feel like 30 minutes, or 30 years, whereupon the defense prepares to actually ask some real questions. Well, if Sidebar 174 was the appetizer, Vallier's cross is the main course of where on earth has this evidence been. On to the defense slow roasting of the lab's chain of custody. Yannetti starts by pointing out that forensic scientist Vallier didn't actually look at the shards themselves, item 7-17. No, she just poked around in the debris, item 7-18, allegedly scraping them off. This debris was a delightful cocktail of dirt, hair, and, you guessed it, microscopic shards of plastic. Shards so small, 1/8 by 1/16 of an inch, they make a grain of salt look chunky. The highlight of the morning was the Odd Question segment. When asked who delivered the shirts and the plastic to the lab, Vallier acted like she'd been asked to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. After some note-taking, she finally coughs up the problematic name, Trooper Michael Proctor. Yannetti then does some basic math for the jury. The blizzard incident, January 29th, and the delivery, March 14th. That's a 6-week gap where the shirts and the plastic were apparently hanging out with Proctor, and Vallier has absolutely no clue what he was doing with them during this extended vacation. Yannetti then takes us on a trip down memory lane, comparing the evidence bags. Trooper DeChico, February 3rd, found tiny, baby-sized shards 5 days after the incident. Trooper Proctor, between February 8th and February 18th, suddenly weeks after the incident and long after the initial searches, Proctor starts finding mega shards, some measuring up to 18 or 19 centimeters long. It's a miracle. The longer the evidence sat out in the wild, the larger the pieces grew. It's like forensic biology, but for plastic. Finally, we get to the reconstruction. Using all these pieces Proctor conveniently found weeks later, Vallier was able to put the taillight back together, like a tragic Lego set. However, even with Proctor's late-blooming discoveries, there is still a glaring hole in the upper left side of the taillight. Where are those pieces? Vallier doesn't know. Proctor hasn't found them yet. Maybe they're waiting on the next cross-examination to make a guest appearance. The chain of custody is less of a chain and more of a suggestion, and Michael Proctor is apparently the Easter Bunny of taillight shards, finding bigger and better treats the longer he looks. Up next, the Commonwealth tries to put the debris back in the bottle. On redirect, Lally attempts a bit of damage control to remind everyone that just because a lab is a chaotic game of telephone doesn't mean the science is, well, you decide. In his brief attempt to steady the ship, Lally clarifies that while the shirts themselves never graced Mix Vallier with their presence, the debris, items 7-17 and 7-18, didn't just fall from the sky. According to her notes, the person who actually scraped the gunk off the clothing and transferred it to the unit was Maureen Hartnett. Finally, a name that isn't Michael Proctor, though she still hasn't seen the actual shirts. Lally pivots to the microscopic plastic specks that were found floating in a sea of dirt and fibers. Vallier explains her high-tech process. She takes a picture of the whole mess, then peers through a stereo zoom microscope to find anything that looks different, like, say, bright red plastic on a gray sweatshirt. In a classic don't blame the messenger moment, Lally gets Vallier to admit she has absolutely no clue who was present at the scene when this stuff was collected, how many troopers were standing around, when exactly it was collected, and essentially, if it happened outside the four walls of her lab, it's not her problem. In the big finish, or lack thereof, Lally ends on the one thing she can say. All those pieces, the ones DeChico found early and the megashards Proctor found much later, did eventually fit mechanically into the taillight housing from the defendant's Lexus. The pieces fit, but the timeline remains a mess. The judge, sensing the jury's collective brain drain, finally grants a morning recess before anyone else has to hear the words apparent plastic again. Just when you thought the morning break was safe, we get Sidebar 175, where the defense tries to pull a fast one with some complicated visual aids. Alan Jackson steps up to the plate for the next witness, and he's brought a brand new toy. He's got a document he stayed up late making, literally, he finished it last night, to help clear up the upcoming testimony about glass testing. He initially wanted to use it as a chalk, or a visual aid, but now he's feeling bold and wants it marked as an actual exhibit, because he finds it extremely helpful. Lally, who only saw this masterpiece this morning, isn't buying it. He immediately pointed out that there are things on it that are incorrect. Jackson quickly admits to a typo where he wrote 3-1 instead of 3-2. Judge Cannoni, unimpressed, warns that she can't let him use it, even as a chalk, if it's factually wrong. Jackson tries to explain that the graphic shows how certain pieces of glass, labeled A through E, don't match the cup or the pieces found by Bukhenik. The judge essentially tells him to slow his roll, pointing out that pulling all these facts together to show non-matches is actually argument, not just a neutral visual. Lally officially objects to putting the graphic on the screen for the jury, calling it inappropriate. The compromise? Jackson gets to try and squeeze the testimony out of the witness first. Then he can come back and beg for permission to show his chart. In the meantime, the judge wants her own copy. The one with the fixed typo, please. The documents are marked as exhibits VV and WW for identification only, meaning they're sitting in the legal equivalent of purgatory while we take a 15-minute break. Just when you thought the microscopic debris portion of the program had reached its peak, enter Commonwealth Witness 53, Christina Hanley, a 16-year veteran of the State Police Crime Lab, and a woman so specialized she apparently has to hire external reviewers because she's the only one in the building who knows how to use the trace unit toys. Hanley spent a significant portion of the morning playing high-stakes puzzles with 4 main items. Item 3-2, a clear drinking glass, the one from the bar. Item 3-3, glass shards pulled from the bumper of Karen Reed's Lexus. Item 7-12 and 7-14, glass and plastic found scattered on the ground and the road at 34 Fairview. The big reveal? The drinking glass was a physical match for 6 of the 9 pieces found on the ground. Essentially, she confirmed that when the glass breaks, the pieces are, in fact, parts of the same glass, because science. Then we get to the consistent stuff. Piece E, a tiny shard found on the bumper, was consistent in physical and instrumental properties with the piece of the glass found on the road. Note the phrasing. Could have originated from, or from another source with the same characteristics. Translation? It's a match. Unless it's a match for any other glass made in the same factory that week. Hanley then turned her attention to item 7-18.18, the scrapings from John O'Keefe's clothing that Maureen Hartnett kindly provided. We're talking the plastic pieces measuring less than 1/16 of an inch. Using her microspec and FTIR, essentially a fancy light and graph machine, Hanley determined that these microscopic plastic and clear specks were, you guessed it, consistent with the plastic from the taillight housing, item 3-1. While we've been hearing a lot about Trooper Proctor, Hanley introduces a new name in the chain of custody bingo card, Trooper Christopher Moore, who was the one responsible for delivering the actual taillight housing to the lab. If you like your evidence measured in less than 1/16 of an inch, and your conclusions wrapped in the legal safety blanket of could have originated from, then Hanley's testimony was a home run. Everything is consistent. Nothing is 100% certain, and the lab continues its streak of never actually seeing the clothes the debris came from. Welcome to Sidebar 176, where Alan Jackson's late-night graphic arts project remains the most controversial piece of paper in Norfolk County. Judge Cannoni has returned from the break, and she's still not a fan of Jackson's summary of shards chart. She reiterates that the document is argument, not evidence. Her ruling? Jackson can show the jury the actual photos of the glass items, 3-2 and 3-3, etc., but any of his helpful little non-match captions or summaries are strictly forbidden. Jackson, trying to save his masterpiece, argues that the glass evidence is extraordinarily complicated because all of the item numbers and that his chart simply tracks the testimony. The judge basically hits him with a speak for yourself, saying she doesn't think it's all that complicated. When Jackson snarks back that she only feels that way because she has his chart in front of her, she hits him with the, "Actually, I wasn't even looking at it." The judge leaves a tiny door open. Jackson can't display the chart for the jury, but if it helps the witness keep her story straight, he can show it to her. Jackson, ever the opportunist, happily takes the deal, promising to ask the witness if she needs his help to not get confused by her own lab numbers. The chart stays off the big screen. The judge maintains her "I'm not confused, you're confused" energy, and Jackson prepares to approach the clerk to retrieve Exhibit VV, codenamed Victor Victor, to begin his cross-examination. Grab your popcorn. It's time to see if Victor Victor helps Hanley find her way through the glass maze, or if Jackson just uses it to point out more typos. Alan Jackson, fresh off his morning coffee and ready to rumble, starts his cross by handing Christina Hanley the very document the judge just finished side-eyeing in the previous sidebar. Jackson spends a few moments making Hanley admit that the document, Exhibit VV, which we now know is the official lab chain of custody report for case 22-02184, is the gold standard for tracking evidence. He gets her to confirm that the lab treats it as a business record, meaning it's supposed to be the gospel truth of who touched what and when. Hanley, probably sensing the trap, gives the very careful yes answers, confirming that she and other supervisors presume these logs are accurate. Having established that the lab relies on this paper for its very existence, Jackson immediately moves to admit it as an official exhibit. If it's an exhibit, the jury gets to see it. If it's an exhibit, Jackson can finally display his complicated tracking system. Predictably, Lally is up like a shot with an objection. He's apparently not ready to let the jury see the lab's homework just yet, especially if it's being presented by the defense. Judge Cannoni, clearly realizing that Sidebar 176 did not actually settle the matter, sighs, metaphorically and actually for those of us watching at home, and calls everyone back to the bench. We've officially spent more time talking about the idea of this document than we have actually reading it. And we're back at the bench for Sidebar 177, where the legal debate over a piece of paper is officially more grueling than the science it contains. We'll call this sidebar the business record standoff. Lally is still playing goalie, blocking the admission of Exhibit VV, the lab's chain of custody report, by calling it hearsay and just a report. Jackson, hitting back with the legal equivalent of duh, argues it's a textbook business record exception. After all, if a government lab's official log of who touched what doesn't count as a business record, what does? Judge Cannoni, however, isn't ready to let the defense have a win just yet. She flatly states, "I don't see this as a business record." When Jackson tries to walk her through the legal criteria, it's made in the regular course of business, created at the time of the event, and relied on for accuracy, the judge basically tells him she needs a minute to think it over. Her reasoning? She hasn't even had a chance to look at the thing yet, despite having it on her desk earlier. Jackson, showing a rare moment of patience, says he doesn't need it admitted this second, and promises not to show it to the jury. The judge doubles down, ordering him, "You cannot show it." Jackson quips back that he wasn't planning on it, but before he can hand it to the clerk, the judge has one final comment. "Take the post-its off." God forbid a stray sticky note contaminates the sanctity of the clerk's desk. The report remains in legal limbo. Its admission is reserved, meaning it's sitting on the sidelines while Jackson gets the green light to finally actually start asking Hanley questions again. Will the post-its ever return? Will the judge ever read the report? Stay tuned as we return to open court, where the evidence is microscopic, but the drama is full-sized. Jackson is finally off the leash. He's decided that if the judge won't allow him to show his argumentative chart to the jury, he'll just build it out of thin air, using the witness as his contractor. Welcome to the Glass for Dummies tutorial. Jackson attempts to clear up the blizzard of numbers by herding the evidence into 4 tidy categories. he's basically asking Hanley to agree to the layout of the chart she's not allowed to see. Item 3-2, the drinking glass, aka the solo act. Item 3-3, the bumper glass, 5 pieces labeled A through E. Item 7-12, the Bukhenik glass, 9 pieces found at the scene with a very confusing naming convention: A, B, C, D, E, F, I, K, and L. Item 7-14, the Proctor glass, the lonely, single shard found by everyone's favorite lead investigator. Jackson manages to get Hanley to confirm the sub-labels for the 9 pieces of glass found by Trooper Bukhenik. It turns out the State Crime Lab's filing system is close to being alphabetical, but takes a weird detour toward the end, skipping G and H entirely. Jackson credits his ability to count these sub-items to his public school education, a rare moment of self-deprecation in an otherwise shark-like cross. The second Jackson utters the name Trooper Proctor in relation to a single piece of glass in Category 4, Vallier is up, like he's sat on a tack. Apparently mentioning which trooper found which evidence is enough to trigger another mid-sentence trip to the bench. We're headed to Sidebar 178. Jackson is trying to paint a picture of Proctor's glass versus Bukhenik's glass, and Vallier is doing everything in his power to keep those labels from sticking. We've made it to Sidebar 178, where the judge is officially over it and the legal equivalent of "because I said so" is in full effect. Judge Cannoni is tired of playing whack-a-mole with Vallier's objections. She makes it clear that Jackson's attempt to brand the evidence as glass retrieved by Proctor is a hearsay-laden no-no. She basically gives Jackson a choice. He can keep trying to slip the Trooper Proctor name into every category, and she can spend the entire morning sustaining every single objection Vallier throws. Or they can actually get on with the trial. The judge isn't just annoyed, she's issuing a warning. She's telling Jackson that if Vallier objects to his argumentative labels or his leading questions, she's going to sustain them every time, despite this being cross and leading is allowed. It's a classic "don't make me pull the car over" moment. Jackson, realizing he's hit a wall, and probably wanting to keep his leading question privileges, finally relents to a simple "I'll cut it out" and "understood." It seems the Proctor glass branding campaign has been suspended, at least for the next few minutes. The sidebar concludes, and Jackson is allowed to return to his cross-examination, presumably with a much tighter leash and significantly fewer mentions of the lead investigator's name. Let's see how long Jackson can go without poking the bear again. Jackson has decided that if the judge won't let him show his argumentative chart to the jury, he'll just use the witness as his contractor. Jackson starts by leading Hanley through the 7-12 glass collection, the 9 pieces from the scene. We learn that most of them matched the drinking glass, but pieces E, I, and L were the odd ones out. In a fun twist of forensic history, we find out pieces E and I were already taped together when Hanley got them, because a previous analyst found they fit like a puzzle, but still didn't match the cup. Next up, the bumper glass, item 3-3. Jackson confirms what the defense has been shouting from the rooftops. None of the glass found on the bumper matched the drinking glass. Not one shard. It turns out 2 pieces were tested and failed, while the others were too tiny and unconditioned to even bother with. Never one to take no for an answer, Jackson tries to slide a single-page document, Exhibit WW, under Hanley's nose. It's his visual aid with the green match circles and red no match slashes. The judge, who has apparently run out of patience for this particular prop, tells him to move along, for all the reasons they discussed at the bench. Hanley, playing the role of the diligent scientist, refuses to validate his visual representation without auditing her entire life's work first. Jackson brings it home with the Proctor piece, item 7-14. He gets Hanley to admit this singular shard of glass is basically a social pariah. It doesn't match the cup. It doesn't match the 9 pieces from the scene. Its only friend in the entire evidence locker is item E from the bumper. Jackson successfully paints a picture of a match that exists only between a random piece of glass on a bumper and a random piece of glass at the scene, both of which are totally unrelated to the victim's actual drinking glass. With a final "thanks, that's all I have," Jackson sits down, presumably leaving the prosecution to wonder why their consistent glass evidence feels so inconsistent. And finally, we have Redirect, the participation trophy round, where Lally tries to salvage some dignity from the glass shards and alphabet soup disaster Jackson just left on the floor. Lally points out that item 7-12, the scene debris, also contains 5 pieces of plastic. He asks why Hanley didn't include them in her connect the dots glass analysis. Her answer is as dry as a chemistry textbook. She didn't compare the plastic for physical match because she didn't have any other plastic to match it to. She then gives us a riveting 10-second science lesson on how plastic is an anisotropic polymer and glass is isotropic, which is a fancy way of saying they're different things, David. Lally tries to get deep into the commonalities of glass and plastic found in the wild. But Jackson is up with an objection before Lally can even finish the thought. The judge, sensing that Lally is wandering into who cares territory, sustains the objection because it's way beyond the scope of cross. Lally ends on what he considers the high notes. The cup, item 7-12. Yes, 6 of the scene pieces definitely came from that drinking glass. The bumper, item 3-3. Yes, piece E from the bumper was consistent with a piece of clear glass found on the ground. Lally finishes his redirect in record time, presumably realizing that consistent with is the best he's gonna get, after Jackson spent an hour proving that the bumper glass is basically a stranger to the victim's cup. Jackson declines a second round of torture. The witness is excused, and the lawyers head back to the sidebar for what I can only assume is a discussion about whether the next witness will be as exciting as watching glass not match other glass. Welcome to Sidebar 179, otherwise known as Lally Loses His Envelope. Lally approaches the bench to announce that his next witness is Sergeant Bukhenik. He mentions he provided some photographs to the court for this witness, leading to a brief game of Where's Waldo with the evidence. Judge Cannoni, clearly thrilled to be doing Lally's filing for him, asks if they are the autopsy photos. Lally clarifies that no, these are the other photos from Good Samaritan Hospital. He insists there are 2 sets in the envelope he gave her. The judge's response is essentially, if they're not in front of me, they're probably on my desk somewhere. Since Lally, shocker, doesn't have a backup copy of the photos on hand, he decides this isn't an emergency that needs to be solved until after the lunch break. The judge agrees to go on a scavenger hunt on her desk during lunch to find his missing medical shots. The sidebar concludes with the confirmation that Bukhenik is actually in the building and ready to go. We're moving forward with the witness, assuming the judge can find the right envelope before the afternoon session descends into a game of guess what the sergeant is describing. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for the main event, or one of them, Commonwealth Witness 54, Sergeant Yuriy Bukhenik, the man with the resume of a literal action hero and the unenviable task of explaining why the investigation started in a blizzard. Bukhenik spent the first few minutes making everyone else in the room feel inadequate. He's a former Marine, with a Yankee White top-secret clearance, which means he guarded the president's helicopter. No big deal. And a former SWAT officer, who's been working homicides since 2015. Basically, if there's a secret or a major crime in Norfolk County, he's probably supervised the guy looking into it. Lally spends a weirdly long time having Bukhenik explain how the on-call schedule works, as if to prove that Trooper Michael Proctor being assigned to this case wasn't a calculated conspiracy, but just a result of Proctor not requesting that weekend off back in December. Bukhenik confirms he's been Proctor's direct supervisor since 2019. The morning of January 29th started with a 6:44 a.m. wake-up call about a body in a snowbank. Bukhenik, showing some actual leadership, told Proctor he'd meet him in Canton after he finished shoveling out during the blizzard. Because the state police apparently don't issue tanks, Bukhenik had to leave his low-clearance work sedan in the driveway and take his personal four-wheel drive truck to navigate the 15 inches of unplowed snow. He arrived at the Canton PD at 9:15 a.m. to find Proctor already waiting in the parking lot. After a 30-minute chat with Sergeant Good, one of the first responders, the dynamic duo headed over to the McCabe residence. In a display of typical process, they interviewed Jennifer McCabe, Matt McCabe, and Brian Albert separately to get their recollections. Next stop, Good Samaritan Hospital, where things got grim. Bukhenik identifies Karen Reed in the courtroom, white blouse, sitting with the defense, and notes she was also at the hospital that morning. Inside the emergency department, they found John O'Keefe's body on a gurney and his clothes, which had been cut off by the medical staff, lying in a big pile on the floor. Just as Bukhenik starts to explain how they bagged and tagged the bloody cut-up clothing, Jackson jumps up with an objection that sends everyone to a sidebar and the jury to a stretch break. Bukhenik is acting professional, prepared, and clearly the adult-in-the-room role for the prosecution. But, as we've learned in this trial, even a Yankee white clearance can't keep things from getting messy when you're picking up evidence off the hospital floor. Welcome to Sidebar 180, or as I like to call it, the Pronoun Police Department. While the jury is busy stretching their legs, the lawyers are at the bench having a fundamental disagreement over the word we. Jackson is officially over the muddled and vague testimony. He's pointing out that when Bukhenik says we bagged the evidence, it's a convenient way to hide exactly whose hands were on what, specifically the hands of a certain trooper Proctor. Jackson's logic: we didn't put the shirt in the bag. A specific human being with a specific name did, and he'd like to know which one. Judge Cannoni, showing her usual level of concern for the defense's time, basically tells Jackson to fix it himself on cross-examination. Her take is that we is just a thing people say, like, we're all talking here. Though some of us are talking more than others. Jackson tries one last time, pointing out that having to re-ask every single question on cross just to clarify who held the pen is extremely inefficient. He asks for a super simple instruction for the witness to just say I or Proctor. Lally, of course, sees nothing wrong with the royal we, and invites Jackson to object all he wants. The judge ultimately denies the objection, telling Lally he can be specific if he wants, but she's not going to make him. She ends with a classic, let's just get through this non-prejudicial stuff, which is judge speak for I'm hungry and I want to go to lunch. So the sidebar ends with the we remaining firmly in place. Get ready for more collective pronouns as we head back to the hospital floor. Back from the sidebar, and wouldn't you know it, Bukhenik is still trying to make a career in fashion and forensic pathology simultaneously. Lally has Bukhenik walk us through the pile of soaking wet clothing found on the hospital floor. The inventory of O'Keefe's belongings included plaid boxers, an orange graphic tee, Lucky Brand jeans, a belt, a light gray hoodie, and exactly one Nike sneaker. Just one. Because in this investigation, finding two shoes in the same spot would apparently be asking too much of the universe. Despite Jackson's earlier protest about the pronoun we, Bukhenik dives right back in. He notes that the clothes didn't just look wet. They had the aroma and visual traces of vomit. Naturally, we, Bukhenik and the infamous Trooper Proctor, double-bagged the items to keep the biohazard from seeping through. Bukhenik then sent Proctor on a scavenger hunt to call the paramedics and ask if they'd accidentally left the other shoe in the ambulance. Lally spends a significant amount of time asking Bukhenik to explain that evidence storage is basically like a digital fortress. Apparently Bukhenik, a supervisor, doesn't even have the clearance to enter the evidence room alone. Neither does Proctor. Only troopers Kotkowski and DeChico have the magic keys. It's a very elaborate way of saying, don't look at us, we couldn't have tampered with it if we wanted to. Then things get spicy. Lally asks for Bukhenik's observations of O'Keefe's body. Bukhenik notes bruising on the eyelids and immediately tries to play doctor, citing his experience with subdural hematomas. Jackson objects faster than you can say medical degree. and the judge tells Lally he needs to build a foundation before Bukhenik can start diagnosing people. I guess I missed where he got an MD. Lally then has Bukhenik brag about his resume, 500 plus death investigations over 9 years, including scores of head traumas. Bukhenik tries again, describing blood pooling in the eyelids. Jackson objects, again. The judge strikes the blood pooling comment and tells him to stick to what he actually saw: swelling and discoloration. When Bukhenik tries to guess what produced a small cut on the nose, Jackson shuts that down too. Lally asks one final time for Bukhenik's expert opinion on the swollen eyes. Jackson objects, of course, and the judge drags everyone back to the sidebar. I guess seeing 500 dead bodies doesn't actually make you a doctor in the courtroom. Who knew? Welcome to Sidebar 181, also known as the "You're a cop, not a doc" reminder. If you were hoping for a long-winded legal debate, you're going to be disappointed. This sidebar was shorter than the time it takes Lally to find a specific exhibit. Judge Cannoni wasted no time in bursting Bukhenik's bubble. Her ruling? He can't give medical testimony. She basically told Lally that while his witness has seen plenty of things in his 500 investigations, he doesn't get to play Dr. House on the stand. The court's boundary was clear. Bukhenik can describe what he saw, the what, and he can even mention he's seen similar things before, but he is strictly forbidden from testifying about what caused those injuries based on his experience. Lally, sensing the vibe was definitely not in his favor, offered a quick "okay" and understood. Jackson confirmed that yes, preventing a state trooper from performing a verbal autopsy was exactly the point of his objection. The foundation Lally spent all that time building, the 500 deaths and the 9 years of service, the scores of head trauma, just got turned into a no-fly zone for medical conclusions. The sidebar wraps up and we head back to the jury, where Bukhenik will now have to go back to being a sergeant and leave the subdural hematomas to the people who actually went to med school. Welcome back to the courtroom, where the rules of evidence are apparently more like vague suggestions, if you're a member of the state police. Lally, clearly undeterred by the sidebar we just had, asks Bukhenik if O'Keefe's injuries were consistent with people who have subdural hemorrhages. Jackson objects, but the judge, in a classic "sure, why not" move, allows it. Bukhenik happily confirms that yes, it was consistent. Apparently, we've found the magic word that bypasses a medical degree. Next, we move on to O'Keefe's right arm. Bukhenik uses the term abrasions. When Lally asks the non-medical definition, Bukhenik gives us a full-blown textbook explanation involving blunt force trauma, the epidermis, and the crushing of the vascular system. For a guy who isn't a doctor, he certainly spends a lot of time talking like one. He describes these injuries as linear and concentrated around the elbow. We learn that after failing to find Karen Reed at the hospital, because she was, at her parents' house in Dighton, Bukhenik and the We Brigade headed over there to track her down. Lally decides it's time to show the jury the actual clothes, and Judge Cannoni decides lunch can wait 30 minutes so we can get through this. For the sweatshirt, it's in a bag. Jackson wants to make sure it actually matches the photos before he signs off. It's marked Exhibit 437. For the orange tee, it's Exhibit 438. Bukhenik pulls it out to show off the orange-colored design. The lonely sneaker. Finally, we get the right Nike sneaker. Just as Bukhenik is about to pull the lone sneaker out of the bag for its moment, Jackson asks to approach the bench. Maybe Jackson wants to know if they're going to search for the left shoe in the evidence room, or if they're going to pretend O'Keefe was a competitive hopscotcher. Stay tuned. We're heading back to another sidebar. Welcome to Sidebar 182, also known as the case of the shape-shifting evidence bags. If you thought the prosecution's handling of this case was seamless, Alan Jackson is here to remind you that seamless isn't a word in the Norfolk County vocabulary. Let the legal squabbling commence. Jackson is officially confused, and for once, it's not because of Lally's monotone. He points out that Sergeant Bukhenik didn't bag these items, didn't sign them, and didn't even put his handwriting on them. More importantly, the orange t-shirt and the gray sweatshirt, which were originally bagged together by Proctor, have miraculously birthed their own separate bags. Lally insists that Bukhenik was present when the items were bagged, and even when the defense came to view them. Jackson's response? A hard no. He claims he's never seen Bukhenik in person in his life until now. Lally doubles down, listing everyone who was supposedly in that room like he's reading a particularly boring guest list for a party no one wants to attend. Jackson, being the gentleman he is, suggests that maybe his memory is faulty, because he's pretty sure the original bag Lally showed yesterday with a different witness has vanished into thin air. He argues that in a case like this, the bags and the chain of custody actually matter. Judge Cannoni isn't disputing that the shirt is, in fact, orange. Her solution? Let the evidence in now, and Jackson can tear the chain of custody apart during cross-examination. The items are staying, but the Proctor bagged it mystery continues. Jackson notes it for the record, likely while mentally preparing to ask Bukhenik if he has a secret twin who attends evidence viewings in his place. Welcome to the John O'Keefe collection, where the prosecution continues to play what's in the bag with a sergeant who was not the one to bag it. Lally finally gets the right Nike sneaker, the only one that decided to show up for the investigation, officially entered as Exhibit 439. Jackson, ever the professional, clarifies that his no objection is actually a no objection given our sidebar conversation about how these bags are sketchy as hell. The court, having heard enough about bags for one lifetime, just nods and moves on. Next, we get a bag that is a real overachiever, containing blue Lucky Brand jeans, a black belt, and black boxer shorts. Lally asks the sergeant to pull out the jeans and the belt for the jury's viewing pleasure. However, when it comes to the final exhibit, things get a bit selective. Lally wants the jeans and belt in evidence, but apparently the boxers are the forgotten middle child of this evidentiary set. The court reporter, understandably confused by the math, asks if they're admitting the whole bag or just the pants party. The judge decides that to keep the record clean, they will mark the bag as Exhibit 440, but physically remove the boxers before it goes into evidence. Because I guess looking at a dead man's jeans is forensic gold. But including the underwear in the same bag is a bridge too far for the Commonwealth. The jeans are in, the belt is in, and the boxers are being evicted from the evidence pile. We've successfully spent the morning proving that John O'Keefe was, in fact, wearing clothes. Welcome to Sidebar 183, where the court reporter is officially over it, and the legal teams are trying to play a very specific game of pretend. Lally wants to move on from the hospital portion of the programming by introducing some photos. Judge Cannoni, however, needs a second to find her gruesome photograph instruction. Apparently, we can't just show the jury traumatic images without a formal reminder that yes, they are indeed traumatic. She tells Lally to go ahead and start laying the foundation, which is lawyer speak for keep talking so I can find my notes. Then we get into the real fun, the recording from the Milton barracks. The court and counsel are engaged in a delicate dance to keep the jury from knowing Karen Reed was actually in custody at the time. If she wasn't officially in custody for the sake of the jury's ears, then the judge shouldn't mention Miranda warnings. After all, why would you need to be told you have the right to remain silent if you're just hanging out at the police barracks? Jackson calls it a good catch, and agrees that mentioning Miranda would just tip the jury off that she was under arrest. The judge will skip the Miranda lecture to keep the she was just visiting fiction alive. But she's reminding everyone that the statement still has to be voluntary. So the plan is, show the gross photos, talk about the Milton recording, and whatever you do, do not mention the C word. Custody. Welcome back to the afternoon session of the Bagging Chronicles, where Sergeant Bukhenik tries to convince us that the state police definitely did not mix up the evidence like a load of laundry. Lally starts by confirming that the clothes the jury just saw were the same ones from the hospital. Bukhenik explains that when they got the items back to the office, they were soaking wet. Shocker, considering they were found in a blizzard. Their high-tech solution? Laying them out on butcher's paper to dry naturally. Once they weren't soggy, they were allegedly put into individual bags, which explains why one bag magically became several. Lally asks the million-dollar question: were the red and clear plastic pieces found on Fairview Road ever in the same bag with the clothes? Bukhenik's answer? No, absolutely not. He's sure about this, despite the defense's heavy skepticism about the mystery of the multiplying bags. We learn that the State Police Crime Scene Services Section, CSSS, is like a rotating door of troopers. Bukhenik notes that throughout the investigation, they had 4, 5, maybe 6 different people show up to take photos or videos, and importantly, it was never the same person twice. Because continuity is clearly for amateurs. After leaving the hospital, Bukhenik and Proctor headed to Dighton to seize Karen Reed's Lexus. Highlights of the trip include, it took an hour to drive from Brockton to Dighton because the roads were a mess. Bukhenik, who is 6'1", claims he was wading through snow up to his waist to get to the front door. As they walked past the Lexus, Bukhenik observed the damaged rear right taillight, which he noted was missing pieces compared to the intact left side. Bukhenik swears on everything holy that neither he, Proctor, nor the Dighton police touched the vehicle. Even the tow truck driver apparently used the force to move it without actually touching the damaged area. Finally, they make it inside the Reed residence, where they find Karen on the couch with her laptop and phone. Her parents are present the whole time, and Bukhenik insists the tone was polite and courteous, because they were just information gathering. They introduced themselves and asked her to walk them through the last 24 hours. You know, just a casual chat between friends, and 2 state troopers who just seized your car in a blizzard. We've got the dried clothes, the car spotted, and the troopers in the living room. But before the conversation gets juicy, the judge senses another sidebar coming in. As we're thinking we're getting to the good part, what Karen actually said, we hit Sidebar 184, a place where legal vibes are curated with extreme care. Judge Cannoni starts by checking if the police actually bothered to interview her. Lally assures her that, oh yes, an interview happened. The goal here is to establish that Karen was clearly not in custody, wink wink, so we can skip the Miranda warnings and just call everything she said a voluntary statement. Jackson, playing along with the not in custody fiction, tries to get a little extra seasoning in the jury instruction. He wants the judge to mention that Karen was heavily sedated in the hours before this. The judge, however, isn't handing out freebies. She'll mention mental condition, but refuses to use the word medication, because apparently we haven't officially heard about that yet. Because this sidebar was all about managing how the jury hears Karen's words, the judge had to hit the pause button on the sergeant to deliver a formal jury instruction. She needed to make sure the jury didn't just take the coming testimony at face value, but rather viewed it through a very specific legal filter. The judge basically tells the jury, look, you're about to hear things Karen allegedly said, but before you believe a word of it, the Commonwealth has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she actually said it and that she wasn't coerced into it. She instructs them to consider the totality of the circumstances, which is a fancy way of saying they should look at the where and when. Was it in a cozy living room or in a cold barracks? The interaction, how were the police acting, and state of mind, her intelligence, age, education, and mental condition, her code for maybe she was out of it. She warns them that no single factor wins the day. They have to weigh it all together. Essentially, she's telling the jury to put on their skepticism goggles before Lally starts the play-by-play. Back in the living room in Dighton, where the voluntary vibes are flowing, Lally is doing his best to paint a picture of a cozy, low-stakes chat, while Sergeant Bukhenik plays the part of the world's most understanding investigator. Bukhenik starts by explaining that Karen was totally down to chat, provided she didn't have to give too many pesky details. Bukhenik, ever the gentleman, says he gave her the courtesy because of everything she'd been through. According to the sergeant, the tone was just a normal conversation. Very neighborly, if your neighbors are state police sergeant asking why your boyfriend is dead. We get the greatest hits of the night before. Apparently, the day started with Karen and John arguing over what the niece and nephew were eating for breakfast. High-stakes argument. She met John at C.F. McCarthy's around 9 p.m. He had Bud Lights. She had vodka sodas. No injuries, no fights, and definitely no roadies. She claims she didn't leave with a glass. She drove to a house in Canton, 34 Fairview, dropped him off, but didn't actually see him go inside. She just pulled a three-point turn and vanished into the night. When asked about the smashed-up Lexus, Karen's alleged answer was a real winner. I don't know, it happened last night. Bukhenik claims Karen told them she didn't go into 34 Fairview because she was having stomach issues. Later, she describes finding John in the snow, doing CPR, and noticing he was bleeding from the nose and mouth, with eyes so swollen they were shut. Just as the sergeant asks for step-by-step details on that three-point turn, the interview got terminated. But don't worry, the police didn't leave empty-handed. They grabbed her phone and her car. Lally then rolls the tape, Exhibit 444. It's the Dighton home security footage showing Karen and her father William Reed arriving in the Lexus. Bukhenik points out a scene on the video where Karen and her dad are at the rear of the car, signaling toward the damaged right taillight. Jackson objects to the sergeant's creative description of their gestures, and the judge tells Bukhenik to stay in his lane. He can say they were pointing, but he can't read their minds. Lally pulls out the laser pointer to show the jury a still image of the Lexus being hoisted onto the flatbed. Bukhenik, ever the eagle-eyed observer, points out that the rear taillight is illuminated, and you can see a white light peeking through. It's a classic gotcha moment, if gotcha involves a blurry video of a tow truck in a blizzard. Also, if you know anything about LED taillights, you know that this is kinda weird. Once they left Dighton, around 4:15 p.m., it was a high-stakes, low-speed parade. Bukhenik and Proctor followed that tow truck like it was carrying the crown jewels, making absolutely zero stops between Dighton and the Canton Police Department. The vehicle finally arrives at the Canton PD around 5:30 p.m., remember this time, and is tucked into the sally port. Bukhenik explains that they chose this spot for two very logical reasons. One, it's the town where the crime happened, and two, it's heated. It was a balmy 18 degrees outside with the wind howling, so they needed the standard garage heating system to melt the evidence. The snow, off the vehicle. Lally introduces two more discs, because you can never have enough footage of the asphalt. Exhibit 445 shows the tow truck and the Proctor Bukhenik chase vehicle pulling into the Canton PD driveway. Exhibit 446. This one takes us inside the sally port. Bukhenik helpfully orients us. There's an antique Canton cruiser on the bottom of the screen, and a random ATV at the top. The Lexus is pulled in from the left, while the driveway is to the right. Just as we're about to see the star of the show, the Lexus, enter the garage, Jackson hits the pause button on the whole production and asks to approach. And now for our favorite courtroom game. Whose discovery is it anyway? Welcome to Sidebar 185. Just as Lally is about to unveil his cinematic masterpiece of the Sallyport, the defense team realizes they're watching a movie they never received an invite to. Folks, this is day 20, and we're talking about discovery. Jackson hits the brakes and basically tells the judge, "I don't know who she is, I've never seen this woman in my life," regarding the video file. The defense has seen the Sallyport video before, but apparently only from the opposite side. This new angle is a total mystery to them. Lally, in his usual everything is fine monotone, claims he provided it specifically after Yannetti claimed during a pre-trial hearing that the existing video was too grainy. He insists it was handed over well prior to trial, though he can't quite remember the date. Because no one can agree on anything, we spend a few lines debating the runtime of this motion-activated thriller. Lally's first guess? 20 minutes of real time, but only 8 or 9 minutes of footage. Jackson's guess? Exactly 8 or 9 minutes. Lally's second guess? Well, actually, it's only 5.5 minutes. Judge Cannoni, sensing the defense is about to have a collective aneurysm, decides to move the jury's scheduled 3:15 break up a bit. Jackson admits he desperately needs to see whatever it is Lally just tried to sneak past him. While the jury is escorted out to contemplate their life choices, the lawyers stay behind to check the receipts. Lally thinks he dropped the discovery notice around April 23, 2024. Jackson and Yannetti quickly do the math. Wait, that's within the last 2 months, after the trial started. We're taking a 10-minute timeout so the defense can finally watch the video Lally forgot to, or totally did, send to them. Welcome to the Secret Cinema Club, where the jury isn't invited and the lighting is moody at best. While the jurors are presumably fighting over the last good snack in the break room, the grown-ups stayed behind to watch Lally's mystery footage in the dark. Jackson, clearly not wanting to miss a single pixel of whatever this is, asks to get a little closer to the screen. We can only assume he was looking for the missing frames, or perhaps a directed by Michael Bay credit? Once the lights go out and the video plays, it's over before anyone can even finish their popcorn. Lally gives his signature confident yet vague, "I believe so," when asked if that was the end of it. But it's Miss Gilman who actually confirms the credits have rolled. With the lights back on, Judge Cannoni pulls out the ultimate weapon, the printed docket. She finds paper number 347, the Commonwealth's 40th notice of discovery, filed on April 24th. According to the court, this was dumped right before impaneling, during that marathon of motions in limine. So technically, Lally did hand it over. He just did it in the middle of a paperwork blizzard while everyone was distracted by other legal fires. Classic prosecution. After all that detective work to prove the video exists on a piece of paper somewhere, the judge decides everyone needs a 5-minute break to recover from the stress of looking at a docket. Back from our 5-minute discovery review break, and Lally is wasting no time getting back to his favorite cinematic trope, the Lexus in the Sallyport. Lally resumes the video, pausing it just as Sergeant Bukhenik is almost falling into the vehicle, which is definitely the kind of professional poise the jury loves to see. The court reporter misses the narration, likely because Lally's whispering is reaching ghost frequency levels, prompting the judge to tell him to keep his voice up. Once the laser pointer is back in action, Bukhenik identifies himself and Trooper Proctor. Lally asks the million-dollar question. Did you or Proctor touch or manipulate the right rear passenger side? Bukhenik gives a firm no, despite the Lexus being their new favorite roommate for the night. The sergeant explains that they spent their evening establishing a perimeter with yellow tape, presumably to warn the antique cruiser and the ATV to keep their distance. Then we jump through time. February 1st, a search warrant is executed. Bukhenik was not there, but he's aware Proctor was. February 2nd, Bukhenik returns to escort the Lexus to the Milton Barracks for safekeeping. Why the move? I guess the Canton PD recused themselves and needed their Sallyport back for actual police work, like transporting prisoners. So the Lexus, now processed, was evicted to an unheated garage in Milton. Lally plays another video, Exhibit 34, from February 2nd at 8:09 a.m. This is the opposite view of the garage. Bukhenik points out 2 major things. First, the taillight is gone, collected as evidence. And second, the caked-on ice and snow have completely melted away. Finally, Lally pivots to John O'Keefe's house on Meadows Avenue. He asks about the exterior ring cameras and what steps were taken to secure the footage. Bukhenik starts to mention multiple search warrants, but Jackson is hitting the objection button like he's playing whack-a-mole. The judge has seen enough for now and calls everyone back to Sidebar, yet again. Welcome back to Sidebar 186. We're closing in on 200 here, folks, and it's day 20, where the tension is high and the foundation is about as solid as a sandcastle in a nor'easter. Jackson is essentially calling foul on Bukhenik being the one to talk about the ring videos. Jackson's objection is short and sweet. Bukhenik did not write the warrants, did not analyze the videos, and did not look at them for the investigation. In Jackson's world, this is a one-man show starring, you guessed it, Trooper Proctor. And Bukhenik is just an uncredited extra who happened to be in the building. He even takes a playful jab at Lally, suggesting that while Lally is clearly dreading calling Proctor to the stand, he's going to have to, eventually. Lally, trying to keep the star witness relevant, argues that because Bukhenik supervises Proctor and has seen all the videos, he's perfectly qualified to testify. According to Lally, Bukhenik can explain how the videos are kept just as easily as anybody else. Jackson's response? No, he can't. He points out that he's seen the videos too, but that doesn't mean he can testify about how they were recovered. Judge Cannoni, ever the diplomat, acknowledges the obvious. Jackson wants Proctor on the stand, and Lally, well, he doesn't. But for now, she tells Lally to stop trying to take the shortcut and actually lay a foundation before he starts asking Bukhenik to describe things he did not technically do. Welcome back to Direct Examination, the We in Team edition. Lally is back from the sidebar with a mission. Convince everyone that Sergeant Bukhenik is totally qualified to talk about things he didn't actually do, because, teamwork makes the dream work. Lally starts with the big philosophical questions, asking how the unit works through a case. Despite Jackson's immediate objection, Bukhenik gets to explain that they address each case with a collaborative effort. He makes it clear they don't use the term lead investigator here. It's a case officer, which sounds more like a glorified wedding planner who organizes individuals and assigns tasks. And shocker, the case officer for this little project was none other than Trooper Michael Proctor. Since the judge told Lally to lay a foundation, he starts digging. He establishes that while Proctor was the one who actually put pen to paper for the ring search warrants, Bukhenik, as the supervisor, was totally aware of the materials and reviewed every single video. But here's where it gets fun. The videos from Ring didn't actually have dates or times on the labels. Bukhenik's brilliant method for telling time? The first video in the pile was the start of the request, and the last one was the end. It's sequential order based on knowing things. The first warrant covered a casual 6-day window, January 24th to January 30th. Just as Lally is about to treat the jury to a private screening of these timestamp-free Ring clips, the judge senses another Jackson-shaped storm cloud on the horizon. Before the first frame can even be played, we are headed right back to, you guessed it, another sidebar. Welcome to Sidebar 187, known as the one where foundation doesn't matter because Massachusetts said so. The judge starts by asking if these Ring videos are already in evidence. Lally, probably clinging to Exhibit 6 like a life raft, confirms they are. Jackson is absolutely not having it. He points out the obvious. The only reason these videos are in evidence is the pinky promise that Trooper Proctor, the guy who actually did the work, is eventually going to show up and testify. Jackson's snark levels hit a seasonal high here. He tells the judge that reviewing a video doesn't make you a witness. He could pick a random person from the audience to review them, but that wouldn't mean they can testify to the bona fides of the evidence. Judge Cannoni, however, isn't moved by the random guy from the audience analogy. She drops a little legal reality check. There is Massachusetts case law that allows police officers to testify about each other's work as a collective. She even adds a little salt to the wound, noting that this particular bit of law is not very helpful to defendants. With a "so yes, you may play that," the judge gives Lally the green light to start the show. Jackson throws in one last objection for the road, just so the record knows he's still annoyed, and the sidebar wraps up. Lights out, everyone. It's time for the Ring Cycle, a Lally and Bukhenik production. Grab your night vision goggles because we're diving into the riveting world of grainy driveway footage and the detective work of looking at the ground. Lally kicks things off with video number 119. Since the videos have no timestamps, thanks Ring, Bukhenik uses his imagined yet advanced meteorology degree, to go with his imagined medical degree, to determine the timing. His expert conclusion? It was before the blizzard, because the driveway does not look like the inside of a snow globe, yet. He spots John O'Keefe's car parked in its usual spot, until Jackson objects and the judge strikes the typical parking habits from the record. We also see a black SUV doing some perpendicular parking, which Bukhenik identifies as the defendant's vehicle. Next up is video 153. Bukhenik pegs this at approximately 5:07 a.m. on January 29th. He can't tell who's driving from the first shot, but Lally has him pause at the significant part. Bukhenik points his trusty laser pointer at the defendant's right rear taillight, noting it is missing or damaged, and exposing a white light. Lally then asks if the SUV hit John O'Keefe's car in the video. Bukhenik says yes, but in a twist that surprises absolutely no one, he claims there was 0 damage to O'Keefe's car and 0 red plastic pieces on the ground afterward. The cinematic marathon continues with videos 165, 166, and 171, featuring a guest appearance by the defendant's father and brother around 12:30 p.m. We see the brother clearing off the car. Lally asks the hard-hitting question: did the brother clean the area of the damaged taillight? Bukhenik's answer: I did not observe that. With the lights back on, Lally shifts gears to February 1st. Bukhenik and a trooper named Connor Keefe, no relation to the victim, just a coincidence for the conspiracy theorists to chew on, headed to CF McCarthy's. Their mission: grab the surveillance footage and the receipts to prove people were, in fact, at a bar. Buckle up, because we've moved from the driveway to the bar, and Lally is determined to count every single milliliter of liquid consumed on the night in question. It's like a Fitbit for drinking, but with more legal objections. Lally introduces a staggering 14 photographs, exhibits 447 through 460, which are essentially high-res screenshots of the Ring video we just watched. Because why see it once when you can see it in 14 slightly different frozen frames? Bukhenik dutifully uses his laser pointer to point out the damaged taillight again, just in case the jury missed the white light special from 5 minutes ago. Now, we're back at the bar. Lally produces 2 more still shots, exhibits 461 and 462 from the dining room camera. We see John O'Keefe in his signature light gray two-tone sweatshirt and jeans. The defendant standing right there with him, the cylindrical vase-style cocktail glass which Lally treats with the reverence of a holy relic. Bukhenik explains that the bar's surveillance system was living in the past, specifically 12 minutes behind real time. So when the video says 8:46, it's actually 8:58. It's a simple math problem that Lally is going to make everyone solve repeatedly for the next hour. If you like spreadsheets and cylindrical glasses, this is your moment. Lally and Bukhenik walk through the video like they're auditing a liquor license, and this is what they propose. Drink 1 at approximately 8:58 p.m. Defendant receives her first tall cylindrical cocktail. Drink 2 at approximately 9:15 p.m. Another cylinder, and the count begins. Drink 3 at 9:20 p.m. Things get fancy. She gets a shot glass, pours it into the tall glass, and John O'Keefe stirs it for her. Romantic or forensic? Lally leans toward forensic. Drink 4 at approximately 9:33 p.m. Another shot is poured into the tall glass. Bukhenik notes she's now stacking her shot glasses like a pro. Drinks 5 and 6 at approximately 9:57 p.m. A 2-for-1 special. She receives a new tall glass and another shot glass to dump into it. Lally tries to get cheeky and asks if the next portion of the video shows rounder shots. Jackson, apparently tired of the liquid inventory, objects. The judge sustains it, presumably because we've already reached our quota for beverage-based adjectives for the day. And now the prosecution is attempting to prove that every cylindrical tall glass is a smoking gun, and Alan Jackson's vocal cords are getting a workout from all the objecting. The math is mathing. Sort of. Lally is still trying to nail down the official drink tally, but surprising absolutely no one, even he's getting confused. Bukhenik observes the defendant's group doing shots. Lally tries to slip in drink number 7, but Bukhenik, who apparently has a better internal abacus than the prosecutor, corrects him. It's actually drink number 6. Lally asks how many drinks she's consumed. Jackson objects, likely because holding isn't swallowing. But the judge allows the answer. The official verdict? 6 drinks by 10:29 p.m. We move forward to 10:50 p.m., real time. Bukhenik notes that the defendant's tall glass is empty or near the bottom. But don't worry, she gets a refill. Bukhenik testifies that once the defendant received drink number 7, she and O'Keefe strolled right out the front door, with the defendant still clutching the tall cylindrical glass like a souvenir. Lally transitions from the silver screen to the paper trail, introducing 5 pages of transaction receipts. A tab was opened under the name Karen A. Reed for $52.80. Interestingly, the bill was settled with a MasterCard belonging to John O'Keefe. Bukhenik starts reading off the menu items. 1 Tito's, $10. 1 Tito's, $10. 1 Coors Light, $5. Before we can find out if they ordered any mozzarella sticks to soak up the Tito's, Jackson objects. The judge sustains it, and the legal teams huddle at the bench for another sidebar, probably to discuss whether a Coors Light counts as significant evidence or just a questionable life choice. Step away from the jury box and lean in, because the lawyers are having a who's the bigger idiot contest at the bench in Sidebar 188. Alan Jackson kicks things off by admitting he doesn't want to sound like a complete idiot, which is usually a sign that things are going great. He's confused about which receipts we're looking at, thinking they were already presented. Lally and the judge have to gently remind him, "No, Alan, those were from the waterfall. These are from C.F. McCarthy's." Once Jackson gets his bars straight, he pivots to a more professional, "I know I'm an idiot" stance. His real beef? Foundation. Jackson argues that Bukhenik isn't the guy to verify the receipts. He didn't ring up the drinks. He just asked for the paper. He specifically points out that just because a receipt says Tito's, we don't actually know she was drinking Tito's. For all we know, that cylindrical glass was full of high-end water. Lally, who has been waiting his whole life for this moment, points out that the defendant basically did the work for them. In her interview with Bukhenik, she apparently admitted she was drinking vodka and soda. Jackson, realizing the "it's just water" defense is dead on arrival, switches to a technicality. These receipts should come from a custodian of record, not a cop who just likes collecting souvenirs. The judge isn't buying the technicality. Since they already spent what felt like 3 years watching the video of her getting the drinks, the receipts are coming in as a matching set. Jackson takes his L, the sidebar ends, and the C.F. McCarthy's receipts are officially christened as Exhibit 463. The sidebar is over, the receipts are in, and Lally is back to his favorite hobby, being the world's most boring lawyer. Just to put a bow on the Tito's saga, Bukhenik confirms that both Karen Reed's and John O'Keefe's receipts at McCarthy's explicitly list Tito's vodka. Because if you're going to allegedly commit a crime, you might as well do it with a mid-shelf brand. Lally then drags us up the street to the Waterfall Bar and Grill. We've got receipts, video, and 4 still shots, Exhibits 464 through 467, that Jackson, surprisingly, does not object to. Bukhenik uses his fancy laser pointer to show O'Keefe exiting the waterfall around 12:11 a.m. The landmark observation? He's holding a shorter, fatter cocktail glass in his right hand. Unlike a bad 90s sitcom, the waterfall's surveillance clock is actually accurate to real time. Lally pulls a spot the difference with the jury. Video 1, 10:54 p.m. O'Keefe and Reed walk into the waterfall. There's some gesturing and hugging and typical bar behavior. Video 2, 11:39 p.m. Karen Reed is seen retrieving a drink from a table and taking a sip. The smoking glass? Bukhenik notes that the glass she's sipping from at the waterfall is a shorter, fatter style glass. This is apparently a huge deal, because it contrasts with the tall cylindrical glass she allegedly walked out of McCarthy's with. Are we tracking glasses? Are we tracking vodka? Or are we just tracking how much longer we have to sit here? The judge, likely sensing the jury's collective soul leaving their bodies after discussing short, fat glasses for 20 minutes, finally calls it a day. He gives the usual speech, don't talk to anyone, don't Google anything, and for the love of God, don't do your own investigation into bar glassware tonight. But the court is not done. The jury has been ushered out, which means it's time for the legal teams to gather at the sidebar for their favorite pastime, arguing about their calendars and complaining about each other. Here is Sidebar 189. Alan Jackson is looking for clarity, which in lawyer speak means he's trying to corner Lally. Jackson wants to know if the Commonwealth is actually going to call Trooper Proctor to the stand. If Proctor is coming, Jackson's cross of Bukhenik will be a breezy hour. If Lally tries to hide Proctor and funnel everything through Bukhenik, Jackson threatens a 4-hour cross-examination marathon. The judge, unimpressed by the drama, basically tells Jackson to prepare for both and see how it goes, noting that she isn't going to force Lally to reveal his hand just yet. We finally get to the dates for the When Will This Ever End tour. Lally expects to rest the Commonwealth's case around June 17th or June 18th. Everyone is reminded that Juneteenth, June 19th, is a federal holiday, so no court then. Lally needs Tuesday, June 11th off for something personal. The judge agrees but hasn't told the jury yet. Shh, it's a surprise. Starting next week, they are shifting to full days, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., to try and move this along before the leaves start changing color. Jackson expects to call 8 to 10 witnesses, including 4 experts, and he thinks he can wrap his case in about a week. If Lally doesn't bury him in extensive voir dires, pre-testimony interrogations. Lally complains he has no idea what the defense experts, like the ARCA folks, are going to say. Jackson hits back with a "my hands are clean" defense, explaining that because these experts were tied to a federal investigation, the feds won't let him interview them or get extra info either. He's got the report. I've got the report. I can't make up discovery. Alan Jackson is essentially telling Lally to learn how to read. The names to watch for the defense: Dr. Wolf and Dr. Rentschler. As the afternoon wound down, the courtroom was left swimming in a sea of physical matches and Scotch tape, with Lally successfully proving that if you try hard enough, you can eventually make a bunch of broken plastic look like a taillight again. Mix Vallier managed to fit piece B and piece F back into the housing, while Alan Jackson sat by, likely counting the minutes until he can take a stereo zoom microscope to the prosecution's logic. We've traded the intoxicated blob for stippling and dimples, but the end result is the same: a slow-motion evidentiary tour that has the jury, and the rest of us, wondering if we'll be home in time for the next leap year. But the real mechanical fit of the day was the scheduling reveal, as we learned that this legal marathon is officially expanding to 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. shifts, just to beat the summer heat. With Lally aiming to rest by mid-June and Jackson threatening a 4-hour cross-examination of the elusive Trooper Proctor, the trial has moved from a brisk walk to a grueling endurance test. The Commonwealth is holding onto their jigsaw puzzles, but with the defense's federal experts waiting in the wings and the judge's patience wearing thinner than a piece of evidence tape, we're all just trying to survive until the Juneteenth break. Grab your calendars. The When Will This Ever End tour is officially adding more dates. Well, that's all we have. So as always, love your family, love your pets, love your neighbors, and we'll see you next time.
Standing here in the shadows of doubt, wheels of fate turning, can't figure it out. Hands are heavy, hearts of stone, this weight I carry, can't do it alone. Eyes of the crowd burning through my skin, their whispers loud, where do I begin? One road to mercy, one road to pain, every choice here leaves a blood stain. Bang, 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 bang. As the virtual juror, what do I choose? Every step forward, there's something to lose. Voices screaming,
a ticking bomb. The line between right and wrong is gone, buried deep in the noise of the fight. Is there a way to make this right? Echoes of their pleas fill the air, shattered dreams scattered everywhere. The gavel falls like thunder crashing, can't stop the tide that keeps on smashing. As the virtual juror